The facts of the extraterrestrial origins of flying devices was recognized in America through the observation of a landing of such an object, where foreign, usually clothed humanoid beings disembarked, collected some plants in the vicinity, re-entered their device and flew away. The observers of these events were two members of the military who, coincidentally, were in just that area while on vacation. Both reported the event to the nearest military facility, allowing the secret investigations and clarifications to proceed, as had already happened in other similar cases that preceded, and also subsequently occurred even more. But everything happened under the strictest non-disclosure, as the Pleiadians/Blairen have affirmed, so the public received no knowledge about these incidents whatsoever, as neither did the main body of the governments, the military and the secret services. It was always only the very highest positions and officials who were privy to the secrets. And it was also these people who even then concerned themselves with, and worked out, concealment tactics to deceive most of their subordinates and the entire population. It was to be avoided that on one hand everything would be known, and on the other hand that those not in the know and not sworn to secrecy, or even civilian personnel, could have contact with extraterrestrials. Therefore a possibility was sought to place fear in humans in relation to the extraterrestrials so that no contact would result from a possible landing or from the crash of extraterrestrial projectiles. Naturally, already in those times there were civilian observers of UFOs, but if this was to be avoided, there would still be fundamentally nothing given recognition in the open media. They also led the population to believe that these strange flying devices were their own secret flying machines, which were just then undergoing initial testing. Therefore the people already at that time were knowingly being led into the dark. Silence was maintained regarding what the UFOs effectively were, namely extraterrestrial, and partly foreign dimensional, interplanetary flying devices controlled by crews foreign to Earth. Naturally, in those days the flying devices were not yet called UFOs, but were given other names. But that doesn't diminish the fact that already after the outbreak of the First World War, in 1915, the American President Woodrow Wilson ordered a non-disclosure in respect of extraterrestrial flying objects, and decreed measures to cover himself with what had been written. The consequences of this unofficial, secret edict, of which also U.S. Presidents Warren G. Harding as well as Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover and Franklin D. Roosevelt, whereby especially Roosevelt, were finally the driving power, was that the angst for extraterrestrial conquerors would be incited to panic, and indeed through a perfidious machination, together with a secret service, through which book authors would be threatened with death in order to start an extremely effective horror scenario. U.S. President Harry Truman was then also later drawn into the conspiracy, because he even cooperated as the highest-placed observer of UFO crash sites. However, things of this kind were not only happening in America, because also in Russia as also in other countries one was becoming attentive to the UFOs and secretly held the view that it must concern extraterrestrial flying devices even when, always again, meanwhile, voices from the uninitiated grew loud in Russia as well as in America that these thereby dealt with new kinds of enemy aircraft. Party leader and dictator Joseph W. Stalin was, for example, like various U.S. presidents, at different times an observer of UFOs, from which he was quickly convinced, despite the angst for the new flying machines of the Americans, that it dealt with intelligences foreign to Earth. One fact that he, however, never made openly known, as also happened with the fact that practically every UFO observation in the Soviet Union fell under secrecy provisions. The darkening, slandering and obscuring machinations of many governments, militaries and secret services, etc., of different countries, began therefore already very early, and indeed much earlier than would be generally accepted by the real UFO researchers. According to the explanation of the Pleiadians/Blairin, however, especially the Americans were leading in this respect, whereby these were also those who held the proof of the existence of extraterrestrial flying objects tied in their hands all really early, and indeed not first since the Roswell case. Truly, all really earlier the Americans had parts of wreckage from crashed extraterrestrial flying devices fall into their hands, as well as mutilated extraterrestrial corpses, which, however, fell under the strictest non-disclosure and whereby, as the Pleiadians/Blairin explained, also undesired UFO crash and UFO recovery observers, as well as recovery workers were /erased/ or forced into silence under the gravest threats. But that was not enough by far, because the longer the UFO appearances in the New Age were observed, the more secretively these were dealt with, and indeed not the least on that account, because the arrival of the extraterrestrials and the enslavement of the terrestrial humanity through the invaders was feared by the American government and their military as well as secret services. And so, that the population should be left in ignorance about the truth of the existence of extraterrestrials. Nevertheless, however, that fear must be developed in the peoples against the extraterrestrials, out of which a far-reaching hate must be established against the invaders, and, thereby, once again a defensive rage steered by hate should result, the U.S. presidency, as well as the leading officers of the military and the secret services, etc., came upon a psychologically sophisticated idea to work out a horror scenario in extraterrestrial matters, and to start it in such a way that not only America would be seized by it, rather also great parts of the rest of the world. This scenario should be configured in such a way that once angst and panic should first break out regarding extraterrestrial invaders, thereafter they then spread further fear and hate far, and could spread it over the world, and indeed also then, when it would be officially recognized that it all only dealt with fiction and therefore a poor utopian piece of work. Thereby the psychological trick would be established, that when once fear is sown, then from that yet greater fear and finally also panic and hate must develop, that follows itself further, always spreading out farther. A fact that was already known then and also today, yet would be practiced again and again over the whole world in different relationships. And exactly angst and terror were necessary, according to the view of the responsible ones, to incite the population against the extraterrestrials, and to prevent them from coming into contact with them if the opportunity should present itself. Through this perfidious and fully thought-out psychological machination of the highest government authorities as well as the military and secret services, it also should be avoided that at any time, any one of the people would gain admission to the extraterrestrials if the opportunity offered itself. The responsible ones not only had fear of a peaceful extraterrestrial official, or unofficial, landing and contact initiative, but they also feared an invasion,